By the time John Quincy Adams became president after the 1824 election, the era of good feelings had vanished. The party system, the original party system, Federalists against Republicans, had dissolved into Federalists going away, Republicans being this sort of one party that governed everything, and on which this party on which James Monroe cruised to victory unopposed in 1820. But one-party systems in democracies are unstable. People have differences of opinions, people have different ambitions, and they're going to differ with each other. By 1824, the party system, the single party, the Republican Party, had split into several different factions. And the factions disputed among themselves, and they ran a nasty campaign in which John Quincy Adams came out the victor after he won fewer popular votes and fewer electoral votes than Andrew Jackson, one of his opponents. But because Jackson did not get a majority of the electoral votes, the race went to the House of Representatives, where John Quincy Adams won. John Quincy Adams's administration was plagued by charges among Jackson's followers that he was an illegitimate president, that he had stolen the election. And in fact, his one term was pretty inconsequential, which is why when I come to listing the best thing about John Quincy Adams's presidency and the worst thing, well, you'll see that I'm sort of stretching the boundaries of what qualifies here. The worst thing that John Quincy Adams did as president was to allow his supporters to wage the vilest campaign in American history in 1828 in a rematch against Andrew Jackson. This was a campaign that involved slander, it involved gross exaggeration of what Jackson had done as president, but the worst of it was that it went after people who weren't involved in the campaign at all, including Andrew Jackson's wife, Rachel. Rachel Jackson was a small-town Tennessee girl, and she had no desire to become famous. She had no desire to be the wife of a president, the First Lady of the United States. But her husband had managed to persuade himself, or he'd been persuaded by others, that he should run for president. And he did. He ran once in 1824 and lost that one in the contested race I just mentioned. He ran again in 1828 and he won. But this time, the campaign was even more nasty than the campaign of 1824 had been. And Jackson's supporters targeted Rachel, saying all sorts of horrible things about her, that she was a bigamist, that she was an adulteress, that she was, well, in these days to say this about a white woman was as base as could be, was thought to be as base as could be, was that she was partially black. Rachel didn't like politics. She wished her husband would simply retire to Tennessee, but she was willing to go along with this. And she didn't sign up for any of this. She was so distressed by the personal attacks against her that she had a nervous breakdown in the latter part of the election campaign. And her nervous breakdown gave rise to a physical breakdown. Rachel Jackson died under this horrible nastiness on the part of her husband's political opponents. So, in fairness to John Quincy Adams, he couldn't control everything that his supporters said and did for him. He couldn't control all of the pro-Adams press. But still, at least he didn't disavow these horrible things. And it's not a good mark on his career. So that was the worst of John Quincy Adams. The best of John Quincy Adams? Well, the best of John Quincy Adams was actually his post-presidential career. Oddly, the best of John Quincy Adams was his pre-presidential career as Secretary of State and his post-presidential career as a member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts. Most presidents, when they leave office, they figure they've sort of done all they can do in politics. And to some degree, they consider themselves above or beyond politics. But John Quincy Adams did not consider it beneath his dignity to accept election to the House of Representatives from his district in Massachusetts. And he served a dozen years in the House, where he became the conscience of Massachusetts and the conscience of the United States against slavery, at a time when the country was working its way through what slavery meant, how it was expanding, how it could be contained, what this portended for the Union of the United States. John Quincy Adams was a clear voice saying that slavery is wrong, slavery must be contained, slavery must eventually end. And he continued to receive criticism, but he stood up under the criticism. He remained in office until he actually died in office. He died in the Capitol. And it was sort of the finest part of John Quincy Adams's career. So the worst of John Quincy Adams was the campaign of 1828. The best of John Quincy Adams was becoming the conscience of the United States on slavery in his post-presidential career.